So welcome everyone to part 3 of our 3-part series for the high holidays to get a better understanding or remind ourselves of the high holiday service. Just admitting one more person. And what we want to focus, here she is, okay. So what we want to focus on today is Yom Kippur. And I want to look at 3 things. We'll see one more person is joining. From these 3 prayers, we'll see how much time we have after that, if there's time to look at anything else. But I want to look at these 3. So I'm going to share my screen now so that we can see. Here we go. Okay, so good. So you're not going to be able necessarily to see everybody now because of my sharing the screen, but and this is I think of Jules, and it's good that Jules is here. There's 120. I lived to 120 in good health, but this prayer you might recognize, Jules. And Sylvia, maybe if Marvin were there, he might recognize it too. It's one of the choir pieces from Kol Nidre. After the silent Amida, it's actually page, you can't see the page numbers on the bottom here. Yeah, I don't know why, but it's on page 223 in the Machzor from the, like I said, the evening service of Kol Nidre. After Kol Nidre and the evening service and the silent Amida, the first prayer after the silent Amida that gets into reinforcing the themes of Yom Kippur is this one, Ya'aleh. So Jules and a few other members of the choir used to have solo parts for this hymn. So when we get to the, and Jules, you should know this, when we get to Areshet Sifatenu on Rosh Hashanah, and when we get to Ya'aleh on Kol Nidre, I always hear your voice when we get to these prayers. So you should know that's what I think about. There's one other person coming in. Okay, so one aspect of the Yom Kippur service is the obviously the idea of forgiveness. It is a day. Another person trying to come in. Yom Kippur is a day that we spend traditionally in synagogue in prayer. Of all the holidays on the calendar, it is the only holiday that is only observed in the synagogue. There is no ritual or food, especially associated with Yom Kippur, that's done at home. You eat before the holiday begins, and then you eat after the holiday is over. And both of those times, you might invite other people to eat with you. But once Yom Kippur starts, once you light the candles to start Yom Kippur, then the only thing we're doing is being in synagogue and praying. As opposed to Sukkot, for example, 5 days after Yom Kippur, where we build a sukkah, and the focus of that is not synagogue, but spending time in the sukkah, eating in the sukkah, and if the weather permits and safety permits, sleeping in the sukkah too. I've never done that, but my kids have slept in our sukkah once or twice over the years. And Pesach, of course, with the Seder, is to be done at home. So most of the holidays, all the holidays, have a home component to them, besides going to shul to daven the service and have elements of the liturgy included for the holiday. But Yom Kippur, solely based in the synagogue. And what we're doing on Yom Kippur, of course, is praying over and over and over again to God to forgive our sins. And the challenge of the Machzor is to provide those prayers in different formats so that even though essentially we're saying the same thing over and over again for all the services of Yom Kippur, 5 services on Yom Kippur, Kol Nidre, which is the evening, then there's the morning service, then there's the Musaf service, then there's Mincha, and then there's Ne'ilah. So we have 5 services on Yom Kippur as opposed to any other day when we have 3, or Shabbat when we have 4, Shabbat or holidays when we have 4 with Musaf. So Yom Kippur has an additional service added that is unique to Yom Kippur to highlight again the synagogue centeredness of the day. So synagogue centered, 5 services. Throughout all those services, we're saying and repeating prayers of forgiveness. So we have piyutim, religious hymns, that are unique to each service as well. So this prayer, for example, is only recited at the Kol Nidre evening service of Yom Kippur. It's not found in any of the other 4 services throughout the rest of the day. So what is Ya'aleh, this prayer Ya'aleh, doing? So first of all, one thing that we find as a commonality of religious poems, of piyutim, as they're called, or piyut is the singular word, is that they are written in alphabetical order. So in a form of an acrostic, that the first letter of each line goes in order of the alphabet. So that's not the case here, but it is the case with the second word. And if you look at the second word, it's the alphabet, but backwards. So instead of going Aleph, Bet, Gimel, it's going, and instead of going A, B, C, it's going Z, Y, X, and do that backwards. But Taf, Shin, Resh, Kuf, Tzadi, Pei, all the way. So you have all the letters of the alphabet here. And then when it gets to Aleph, you got 2 more, right? Because there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And if you're going in groups of 3, you need 2 more, 24, to be divisible by 3. So that's the author of this piyut decided to go backwards. And according to, we'll get to what it's talking about in a moment, but according to the commentary of our Machzor, Ya'aleh is an anonymous medieval poem. Okay, so it's of the piyutim. Some could be written from the land of Israel 1,500, 1,200 years ago. Many of them are written in the Middle Ages, usually by Ashkenazi rabbis, since we are using an Ashkenazi edition of the Machzor. So somewhere in Central Europe in the Middle Ages. So his theme, Ya'aleh, so the first word of each line, Ya'aleh v'yavo v'yera'eh. Ya'aleh v'yavo v'yera'eh. So, the English translation, Ya'aleh should rise up, v'yavo should enter, v'yera'eh should be seen. Ya'aleh v'yavo. So does anybody, you can unmute yourself if you know the answer to this, does anybody recognize Ya'aleh v'yavo from any other prayer? So let me show you just for a second on this screen. In the Amida, this is the evening service, okay? In the Amida, morning, afternoon, and evening on Rosh Chodesh, the new month, or holidays, because this is a weekday service, this is the intermediate days of the holiday, but on Rosh Chodesh and all days of holidays, we have a prayer that is inserted in the Amida, which starts Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu Ya'aleh v'Yavo. This prayer is called Ya'aleh v'Yavo because of these first 2 words here. So the context for this prayer in the Amida is we're asking God to accept the prayer of your people Israel as lovingly as it is offered. Restore worship to your sanctuary, and may the worship of your people Israel always be acceptable to you. So that is a prayer always recited as the first of the last three prayers of the Amidah, 3 times a day, 365 days a year. Always. The first of the last three in the Amidah begins with here. If it's Rosh Chodesh or any other holiday, this paragraph is added to emphasize our God and God of our ancestors, show us your care and concern. The English butchers the Hebrew. The Hebrew is our God and God of our ancestors. It should rise up, it should enter, it should arrive, it should be seen, it should be wanted, it should be heard, it should be remembered, it should be remembered. Our memories, and the memory of our ancestors. Many verbs as synonyms for the memory of our ancestors to be seen by God, and that they should enter to God and be a merit, be serving as a merit to allow our prayers to enter to God. So who are we, Joe Schmo, to say a prayer? We're asking for our ancestors and their prayers to be a merit for us. They were great, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, etc. Since they're up in the world to come in God's heavenly court, because they're there and because God had a relationship with them, we ask God to allow our ancestors to be like credit for us. We are nothing, we are dust and ashes, but our ancestors, they were something. So please, God, let our ancestors' prayers, may their merit serve to help us. So that's a theme that we have in many prayers, whether it's on a regular weekday, right? And it even starts, every single Amidah starts with that thought, asking, when we pray to God, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'lehev Otenu. Praised are you, God, the God of our ancestors. That's how we begin our prayer. It's not just praised are you, God. It's praised are you, God, the God of our ancestors, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Every single Amidah, 3 times a day, 365 days a year. Yom Kippur, 2 extra services, 2 extra Amidahs. We always refer to the ancestors. And sometimes we do it extra time, like here in this Ya'aleh V'Yavo on the holidays. So back to the Machzor, that is what the author of this medieval piyut, which has become part of the Kol Nidre service now, wants us to remember, so that those familiar with the liturgy, those who are familiar with, who make davening a regular habit in their lives, would automatically remember that Ya'aleh V'Yavo from the holiday service. The author of this piyut, in Hebrew, a poet, so an author of a poem is a poet, an author of a piyut is a payatan. So this payatan, this anonymous payatan, is using that prayer that he knows, and I'm assuming it's a he, because almost, I'd say 99%, if not 100%, of the prayers in our Machzor, in our prayer book, are written by men. This Payatan, he wants us to remember that Ya'aleh V'Yavo prayer, and he's incorporating that into this. So that's, I wanted us to understand that this hymn, that is a feature of the Kol Nidre service in all Ashkenazi synagogues around the world. After the silent Amidah, before we do the Al Chetz and the Ashamnu, way before that, we have this hymn that's a feature of the evening service. So what we're asking for here is, may our supplications rise up at evening, our pleas arrive with the dawn, our songs transform the dusk. So remembering that here we are, the Kol Nidre evening, But we're going to be back in shul tomorrow morning and staying through the evening. We're not doing that this year, but every other year, that's what we would be doing. And there are many people who come to shul in the morning on Yom Kippur morning and stay. They don't go home. They stay in the building and they're there all day. Now, not just me and the cantor, but I'd say we have 10 to 20 people who stay in shul all day long. And it's not just a Sharei Tefillah custom, it's a custom for Jews in synagogues around the world to do this. So we're saying at the very first service that we're here for, on Kol Nidre, may our supplications, Tachanunenu, rise up at the evening. So here we are at the evening service. We want our prayers tonight to rise up to God. And tomorrow morning too, those prayers should enter into God's court as God is sitting on the throne, that they arrive with the dawn and our songs should transform the dusk. That transform, I don't know if transform is the right word, the Yera'eh Rinonenu ad Arev, that our songs should be seen by the evening. So we have all day to ensure that our prayers get in, like in other words, you can imagine somebody who's trying to see the CEO of the company and has no relationship with the CEO. You hang out by the receptionist's desk and you are insistent, I'm just going to stay here. I really have something important to say to the CEO and I just really want to see him or her. And the receptionist says, well, really, you got to make an appointment. You got to know somebody. Well, I don't know anybody. I need to make an appointment. Please let me see the CEO. So you sit in the waiting room and the receptionist gets nervous. It's a little bit awkward. You can't really, could have called security to kick the person out, but the receptionist isn't kicking the person out. So they're insistent there. So finally, and maybe she would have had a secret message somehow to the CEO. I know this person waiting here seems like a nice person, but you don't know him. I don't know what you want to do. So you wait the person out and they're still there and finally is seen. So that's one image that you can have of what's happening with our prayers. Who are we? Do we have a relationship with God? Do we feel like we're on good terms with God? And if we do, then we might feel more confident that our prayers would be heard. But if we don't have a relationship, and then we're like that person at the CEO's office, just praying that the CEO has mercy on you to give you a minute to listen to you. And that's also the way we can picture this prayer, that we're just hoping for even a moment. Let the prayer hang out in God's waiting room. And eventually, by the end of the day, by Ne'ilah, before the doors shut and are locked, this prayer will go in, and our prayers will go into God, and God will say, oh yeah, now I can hear this person's prayer, and I will listen to that prayer. So that's the idea. So taking a word for each letter of the alphabet, kind of supplications, our pleas, our songs, our voices, our acts of justice, our redemption, our suffering, our forgiveness, our plea, another word for suffering, another suffering. Okay, so you see what the author is doing in this. Anybody have a question or a comment about this prayer before we go on to another one? So now I have to move the page, and I need down here to do that. Okay, so it is 472. There we go. Okay, another feature. So that Yale is only for the Kol Nidre service. This page and the page before, just a second, I got to move people out of the way. No, really, it's this page in the context. This page we have in every single service on Yom Kippur. So all 5 services, we have this prayer. And so one thing, we're not only praying for forgiveness on Yom Kippur, we are praying that our prayer of forgiveness will be accepted by God and we will be forgiven. So one thing we're doing is we're praying for forgiveness. We're also praying to God to accept our prayer of forgiveness so that we will be forgiven. So it's praying for forgiveness with the hope that we will be forgiven. That's what we want to do on Yom Kippur. And so the image that our prayer book focuses on for that prayer for forgiveness is the ultimate act of forgiveness from the Torah. And so that would be when Moses received the 10 Commandments. At the time he came down the mountain, what were the people of Israel doing? They were worshiping the golden calf, right? So at that most spiritual moment in the history of the Jewish people, when the people knew that Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, learning the Torah, waiting for him to bring the Torah back to the people, they got impatient and he was late. That's what the Torah says, Ki boshesh Moshe. He was delayed. We don't know how he was delayed, what was delaying him, how the people were keeping count of the 40 days. They just had a sense that he was delayed. And so what did they do while he was delayed? They didn't call and say, hey, Moish, are you okay? Where are you? We're waiting for you. Is everything okay? They didn't do that. Instead, they went to Moses' brother and said, well, it looks like your brother isn't coming down. We need a substitute. Build us a substitute. So the golden calf comes as the substitute. So the ultimate rejection of Moses and especially of God. The people had just experienced the plagues in Egypt, had just celebrated the first Passover in Egypt, had just witnessed and experienced the Exodus from Egypt, had just defeated the Amalekite people in a miraculous fashion too. All these miracles happened, and they're at Mount Sinai, and they heard the 10 Commandments in a miraculous fashion too. So you'd think all of that nobody in the history of the Jewish people ever experienced before and have never experienced since, despite that, they still build the golden calf and worship the golden calf. So Moses, instead of giving up on the people right there, God was ready to give up on them, the Torah tells us. Moses instead prays to God to forgive the people. And see, here I have, this is a website called Sefaria. It's a great free online website if you want to see anything in Hebrew and in English from the Bible, from the Mishnah, from the Talmud, any great Jewish sources. This is chapter 34, right after that. So now Moses prays for forgiveness for the people. So that now God says, carve 2 tablets of stone like the first. Okay, I'll listen to your prayer and I'll forgive the people, and I'll even make another set of 10 commandments for you that you can bring to them. And I'll inscribe upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets. Be ready by morning. In the morning, come up to Mount Sinai, present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. I'll give you the commandments. No one else shall come up with you. Don't let anybody get close to the mountain. Then, so Moses carved the 2 tablets of stone. The Lord commanded him, taking the 2 stones with him. Then God came down in a cloud. God stood with Moses there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. Vayikra b'shem Adonai. Vaya'avor Adonai al panav vayikra. The Lord passed before Moses and proclaimed, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim, V'Rav Chesed V'Yemet, Notzer Chesed La'alafim, Nosei Avon V'Fesha V'Chata'a V'Nakei. Okay, and we sing that when we take the Torah out of the ark, which we're not doing this year. We sing that 3 times in a row. Right, to be reminded of that experience of having been forgiven, God giving us a second chance and reminding us, technically, this is called by the rabbis, the 13 attributes of God. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. Now, what it skips is, what it skips is the rest of the verse. Yet God does not remit all punishment, but visits the iniquity of parents upon children and children's children, upon the third and fourth generations. So no, in the Torah, okay, punishments will be meted out if they are deserving, even until the third and fourth generation. But the rabbis omit that from the prayer book and only focus on the Lord, the God is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger. So that's what we're focusing on Yom Kippur. Every single service, we say this line and are reminded from the Torah about how compassionate and slow to anger God is. So that when we are on Yom Kippur, wondering whether God is going to listen to our prayers, we have that reminder from the Torah in which the greatest sin of the history of the people, the golden calf, was forgiven. If that greatest sin was forgiven by God and reminded that God is slow to anger, how much more so in our generation, which pales in comparison to the sin of that generation, that we should feel confident that God will forgive us too. So that's why this prayer reminds us of what happened, of that incident in the Torah. So El Melech Yoshev al Kisei Rachamim, God sovereign, who sits on a throne of mercy. That's what we picture on Yom Kippur, acting with unbounded grace, forgiving and the sins of your people one by one as each comes before you, right? So all 13 million Jews in the world today, each one of those today on Yom Kippur, each one of them praying to God for forgiveness. Every single prayer comes before God and God listens, generously forgiving sinners and pardoning transgressors, acting charitably with every living thing. Do not repay them for their misdeeds, right? Don't focus on the things we did wrong. Focus on the fact that we're recognizing we did wrong. We're praying for forgiveness now. So focus on the good that we're doing now, as opposed to the bad that we might have been doing 364 other days of the year. God, you taught us how to recite the 13 attributes of your name. Remember the promise implied in these 13 attributes, which you first revealed to Moses, the humble one, as it is written, right? Kamosha Katu Vayered Adonai Ba'anan. That's what I just showed you from the Torah. Vayatsevi Mosham, he stood with them there. Vayikra b'shem Adonai, and called in the name of God. Vayavur Adonai al panav, and then we sing this. V'salachta lavoneinu ulechatanu unechaltanu. And then we sing this together. We beat our chest at this line. Selach lanu avinu ki chatanu nechalanu malkeinu ki fashanu. Ki ata Adonai tov v'salach v'rav chesed l'chol korecha. That's one of the tunes for this line. So forgive us, our Father, because we have sinned. Forgive us, our King, because we have sinned. Okay, but using different words for sin, using different words for God, and different words for forgiveness. Because you are God who is good and forgiving and full of compassion for all who proclaim your name, or for all who call on you, right? All we have to do is call on God, and God will listen to us. Right, so Dennis says, so why do we say multiple times why do we confess our sins multiple times if God has forgiven us? We don't know if God has forgiven us. We don't know. God has forgiven us in the past at the golden calf, but we don't know if God's going to forgive us today in 2020, the beginning of 5781. So we can only refer to other events in Jewish history in which God has forgiven us, remind God of those times that God forgave us, and over again, we recite these prayers hoping that God will listen. But that gets into the bigger question, Dennis. Why are we saying these prayers? Do we actually believe that God is listening? Or do we believe that God is listening? Or are we doing it because we think God is listening? Or are we praying in order to change ourselves? So let me just so Gabe, not taking out the Torah this year, is that due to social distancing or another reason? It's definitely social distancing, because there's no way that I know of that we can read Torah in a socially distanced, safe way. So there are some Orthodox minyanim that might be taking the Torah out of the ark, but the way they are doing it, if they are having indoor services, one person is on the bima to take out the ark, and that one person is the only person that holds the Torah. That person is not walking around the congregation. That person is at the bima, unrolling the Torah and chanting from the Torah himself. And I'm saying it himself because in an Orthodox congregation, that's the way to do it. I felt that that's not a way to read Torah this year. It would be more painful to take out the Torah that way without being able to touch it than more painful to do that than to not read Torah at all. So, and we have a 2-hour time limit, 2-hour-ish time limit for Zoom attentiveness and for an effective spiritual service. So that's why we haven't been reading Torah on Shabbat. We only have like a substitute of doing reading from the Chumash. And we haven't been doing it other holidays, and that's why we will not do it until it's safe to be back in the building to be together with, yeah. So that's just how I've done it, and that's how many other rabbis have decided to do with the Torah reading. Is making the golden calf a greater sin than murder? That's an interesting point, and no, it's not. And the point, Fran, is that the golden calf is the worst community of Israel sin, as opposed to individual sin. The entire community of Israel was involved in the sin of the golden calf. Murder happens one at a time. So no, golden calf is not, in the scheme of things, murdering another person is a horrible offense. But in the spiritual life of the people of Israel, the golden calf itself is the worst sin of the entire people of Israel at once. Okay, so that's the distinction. So back to Dennis's question, which led me to be thinking about the purpose of prayer itself. So I believe, as you've heard me teach this repeatedly over the years, I don't believe that God intervenes in our life. I don't believe that God listens, that God is sitting on a throne. I don't believe that God is moving from the throne of judgment to the throne of mercy. And I don't believe that God has a book of life before him, waiting to write us in the book of life or not. So I don't believe in those images. Those images are there in the Machzor to help us understand what the rabbis thought about and what the rabbis are trying to teach us about theology. But the traditional theology is that yes, God does intervene in our lives, that God is influenced by our prayers, that the covenant relationship that we have with God, the mitzvot that we follow based on the Torah, that covenant is a two-way street, that it's not just us that have to act, but God has to act too. So so that two-way street, God does God's part when we do our part. So if we follow the commandments, then God does God's part by rewarding us or blessing us. If we don't follow the commandments, then God does God's part. We do our part by not following the covenant. God does God's part by punishing us. Um, so, so is it arrogant or wrong to assume that after prayer for forgiveness and true teshuva that God does forgive us based on knowing he has forgiven us in the past? Or should we have an attitude of waiting, not knowing what God's ultimate decision towards us will be? We don't know that we've been written into the book of life this year until Rosh Hashanah next year, right? God forbid somebody dies. Okay, so this is painful to hear, and I'm sorry to Jules, whose wife Zelma died in July. So so yes, you can take this personally, Jules, and all of us, it's meant to be taken personally. But I want you to understand this in the context of Jewish tradition. So Jewish tradition would ultimately teach that for some reason Zelma was not written into the book of life this year. That's what the tradition, Jewish tradition, would have us believe. So now I can't believe that Zelma would have done anything wrong, worthy enough not to be written in the book of life. You know that she never did. Your children and grandchildren know that Zelma did nothing wrong to be written into the book of, not be written into the book of life this year, right? So I believe that. I believe that Zelma did nothing wrong. She's a righteous person, a good wife, etc. So how then do we reconcile what the rabbis are teaching, that if we don't make it till next Rosh Hashanah, then we're being written into the book of death, or not being written into the book of life? That is the ultimate question that the rabbis try to answer, the unanswerable question. Why someone dies, why good people are punished, why bad things happen to good people, why good things happen to bad people, right? That's the ultimate, those are the ultimate questions. So the Machzor, which expresses the traditional understanding of this, is all we can do is focus on ourselves, and we have no idea what God will do. We have stories, we have a written record of what God has done before. Now, understand, the written record is the Torah. But then you get to the question, who wrote the Torah? But for the rabbis, God wrote the Torah. So we have a written record of God having written the Torah, of God forgiving us before. So if God forgave us before, how did God forgive us before? Because Moses intervened on our behalf, right? So now we pray for our ancestors to intervene for us, including Moses, just like he did before. So we ask for Moses to intervene for us. If we have true repentance, like the Israelites did, like Moses prayed for us, then just as God forgave us before, God will forgive us again. Will that definitely happen? We have no idea. We have no idea. So part of this is faith. But really what I understand about all these prayers is that really prayer is our vehicle to navigate the chaos of life. So when bad things happen to us, when bad things are happening to us, so either the bad thing happens once quickly or is a process of happening, someone being sick for a long time that we're taking care of him or her. When bad things happen to us, what do we do to survive that bad thing happening to us? So we do the medical things that we're supposed to do. We do the financial things that we're supposed to do. We call on family, we call on community. We get the support of people in our lives. These things are the best that we can do. And sometimes that helps, and sometimes it doesn't. All medical science, best medical science, we're all suffering. A bad thing is happening to us right now. The pandemic is happening to us. The best minds are working to stop it. But in the meantime, bad things are happening to us. How are we surviving? We are surviving by being with friends and family. We are surviving through the other decisions and resources that we have. But another way to survive is to pray, to recognize that there's a higher authority out there and putting our trust in that higher authority. Whether we believe God is going to intervene or not, I'm not saying that this traditional understanding is wrong. I'm not saying that the Machzor is wrong. Please do not understand it that way. I'm just saying that I believe something different from what the Machzor says. I have a different approach to the traditional words of the Machzor, because the traditional words don't satisfy me. They don't provide comfort. They don't express my picture of a compassionate God. When people die so-called before their time, that puts into question all the words of this prayer book. So therefore, I have a different theology, a different approach to God, that prayer is our attempt to try to gain control over our lives. While things are going crazy around us, we know we have a Kol Nidre service to look forward to, that at 6:30 on Sunday evening, September 27th, we're going to be in our Zoom synagogue to pray. And that provides us for a time, an escape from the craziness of the world around us, and it provides us with words to say to try to regain some control in our life. And so by reciting these words, which we didn't write, they've been in the prayer book for over 1,000 years. So just knowing the history of the words that we're reciting provides us with a comfort. It provides us with a rock, something stable to hang on to, while the world continues to go crazy around us. Danny, I know you asked me a question privately, and so I'm not going to, since that's not exactly about our topic right now, I'll get to it another time. And so, so prayer then, for the rabbis, prayer is just as good as building a sukkah or giving to charity or doing charitable deeds. There are mitzvahs that can be written down in the ledger that God has in front of him that can count for our benefit. And so prayer for the rabbis is another mitzvah that we perform that God can clearly see that we are in. Is it good to be in the red? If it's good to be in the red, then no, it's good to be in the black. So better to have more deeds in the black than in the red. And so that's what prayer does. So the more we pray, the more other mitzvahs we do, then traditionally we've done everything we can to be written in the book of life. For me, prayer is about getting recentered, to focus on the values that are important in our life, to reach out because it responds to an emotional need that we have. We need to cry. We need to be angry. We need to express love. That's what prayer does. And not just anger, love, crying out to loved ones, but also to God, that it's a recognition personally and also as a community. We're doing our best. We're trying to do our best. We want to do our best. Please, please help us continue to do our best. If only we could have a sign, and we could ask for these things, not knowing whether they will come. And I don't believe that these signs will come, but it's a response to what we are emotionally feeling at this time of year. No matter what happens in our life personally, no matter what's happening in our life as a global community because of the pandemic, no matter what else is happening social justice-wise in America, protests that are happening across the country, climate change, and what's happening with the environment, with the increased amount of hurricanes and the fires out west. You know, things that we could control. If only our political leaders had the will to do something about it to ease the effect of the human role in climate change. Oh, just a few examples of many that we can see that we cry out against these injustices and what we want to do, what we want to try to do to gain control over that and overcome. So that's what these prayers try to do. So when the Machzor brings us back to Mount Sinai and the golden calf, the Machzor is doing that to remind us of that great spiritual moment in our tradition, the greatest spiritual moment in our tradition, not just hearing God's voice with the Ten Commandments, but also knowing that God has forgiven us before. And just as God did before, so we hope God will again. So we have a couple more minutes. Let's go on to just a couple pages ahead. This prayer. So for this prayer, Shema Kolenu. So the Shema Kolenu is also in every single service of Yom Kippur, was also in Slichot, and the prayer we just did before was in the Slichot service too, the Saturday night Slichot service that ushered in officially the high holiday season. The Shema Kolenu, done with the ark open, and the cantor or whoever is leading the service does the line first, and we repeat after them to emphasize the importance of the verse. So I'm not going to sing this because I'm not a cantor. Cantor Adina does it much better. And so Shema, hear our voice. Now this also is taken from the Amida. So right before this prayer, where the Ya'aleh v'Yavo came from, right before this prayer is this. Shema Kolenu Adonai Eloheinu. So from the Amida, 3 times a day, 365 days a year, all weekday Amida. So this is not recited on Shabbat and holidays. So morning, afternoon, and evening on weekdays, this paragraph is included in the Amida, and it starts, Shema Kolenu, hear our voice, Adonai our God, have compassion upon us, pity us, accept our prayer with loving favor. So that's how the Shema Kolenu prayer in Yom Kippur starts. Shema Kolenu Adonai Eloheinu, chus v'rachem aleinu, v'kabel b'rachamim v'ratzon et tefilatenu. And we see it here. Shema Kolenu Adonai Eloheinu, right? So it's from the Amida. So another thing about these piyutim, the Payatan would take a line from the Amida and expand upon it in their religious hymn. Take the Shema Kolenu. Everybody knows it, the Payatan says, at a time when people did not have printed prayer books in front of them. This was before the printing press. People had manuscripts if they could afford it. If not, they just relied on their memory. Everybody remembered the Shema Kolenu, so the author of this prayer uses that, and then takes other verses from the Bible. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva, return us, God, to you, so that we return. Renew our days as of old. Right? This is when we put the Torah back in the ark. So it's part of that. So I haven't sung that in a while, but this line is part of that. And then Al tashlichenu milfanecha, don't cast us out from before you. The Ruach Kodshecha, your Holy Spirit, Al tikach mimenu, don't take away from us. Al tashlichenu leit zikna, don't cast us away into old age. Kichlot kochenu al tazvenu, when our strength fails, do not abandon us. Right, so here we are, what we are beseeching God on Yom Kippur, this very, very personal, it's written in the plural, so all of us agree that this is a focus of one of the focuses of our prayers on Yom Kippur. Please, God, don't abandon us. This is so no matter what kind of theology we have, whether we think God is actually imminent, is right here, active in our lives today, or whether we think God is far away and our job is try to look for God and be on the search for God, please, God, listen to our voice. Whether God is here, whether God is far away, we want to know, we want to be comforted in knowing God's listening to us, and we want to feel a sense of mercy and compassion. We don't want to be left alone. We want to be rejuvenated. We don't want to feel abandoned by God, that we're on this journey by ourselves. We want to have a sense of Holy Spirit about us. And don't cast us off as we get older. Don't leave us alone. And as our strength wanes, as we're feeling more vulnerable, we don't want to be alone. Please, God, be with us. Please, God, help us find you. Help us find the strength. So this is an amazing, amazing spiritual prayer that we find. This isn't reminding us of Mount Sinai and how God forgave us at the golden calf. This isn't any other reminder of any other time in history. This is not the martyrology service in which we remember martyrs in Jewish history over the centuries who gave up their lives for the sake of God's name. No, this is deeply personal, reflecting our vulnerability, our weakness, our solitude, and perhaps feelings that we have often in our lives, especially this year in the pandemic, these feelings of isolation, etc. So even that much more powerful this year to recite. We don't want to be alone. We don't want to feel abandoned as we do as we have felt sometimes this year. We want to feel your presence, God. Help us find a way to do that. So here we go. So that is what I wanted to share with you for Yom Kippur this year. I hope you found this meaningful. So now let me just look at Danny had asked about how we're going to do the rest of the holidays this year. The rest of the holidays are the same as we've been doing. Everything's going to be on Zoom all along. So we're in the process of figuring out whether the sukkah is going to get built. And if the sukkah gets built, then I will be able to advertise opportunities for people or families to be in the sukkah themselves. Bring your own food to the sukkah. We won't provide it for you, but bring your own food to the sukkah so that you'll be able to have a Sukkot experience. But we won't be able to sing and dance with the Torahs for Simchat Torah. We're going to figure out another way to rejoice with the Torah on Simchat Torah. So, this is how the holidays are this year. Most likely until a vaccine is found. I mean, we might go into phase 3. There might be an opportunity for us to be in a sanctuary together, but I'm not sure people's attitude in our shul is going to be, yeah, I want to sign up for that. I mean, so we've given people the opportunity to come to shul to say a prayer in front of the ark, hear the shofar being blown outside and go across the street. Of all the high holiday packets that we've gotten returned, and also the Google form that I've had for people to fill out, maybe there are 25 individuals or couples who have responded to that. So 10% of the shul responded, say, yes, I want to find a time to come to shul for that. So I don't know, I thought it would be more people who would want to have that opportunity, but it just reflects the idea that people are still scared, and rightly so. So with that, hopefully Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur should be a meaningful time for all of us, that hopefully we'll find meaning being together on Zoom. It's nowhere near the experience that we could have in being together in the room together. But may the Zoom experience that we have help lift up our voices, help give us the strength that we need so that 5781 will be a year of safety and health and peace for everybody. So Shana Tova, everybody, a happy and a healthy new year. And I look forward to seeing you in Shul Friday night, Shabbat, Rosh Hashanah, Sunday as well. Take care, everybody.
Right. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, everybody.
Shana Tova.